Build compelling real-time apps quickly and scale them globally with the PubNub real-time network. Only PubNub delivers the core building blocks needed for any real-time application. Find out for yourself by signing up for free today. Visit pubnub.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Untitled.tv. I'm your host and founder, Rob Woodbridge. Today, we are going to talk about why developers can no longer ignore China. This is one of these things that we've all heard about. I've interviewed many mobile entrepreneurs who have gone to China first and gone to Asia first instead of going to the US, simply because of the market size and the opportunities. And I think probably the lack of selection at some point, early on anyways, that they've established a foothold in China and then have flourished there, made a lot of money, and then eventually come over to the United States. So a few things about China. If you didn't know, it's obviously a big country, very populous country. And last year, it actually now is the most active country for activations in iOS and Android for smartphones. It has surpassed every other country. It also has surpassed the United States for connectivity in general, with more than 321 million connected devices, that's smartphones and feature phones. And then it's projected by 2013 actually to have over 500 million smartphones activated in the country. Now that is a huge market. And these are all numbers that I am actually gleaning from InMobi. They just came out with a report, which is basically the Chinese opportunity versus the US opportunity and why you have to be in China if you are thinking or considering or in the mobile space. And joining me to talk about this from India, which is another emerging economy, is Piyush, Shah, who's the VP and GM, Performance Advertising and Developer Platform. He's live from Bangalore. I got to tell you, it's 10 p.m. in Bangalore. It is midday here in Ottawa. Yeah, Piyush, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you sticking around just for me, man.
Sure. Thanks, Rob.
So
Pleasant to talk to you.
Why don't we start with a little bit about, I've sat with a number of people from InMobi, but talk about what you do for InMobi, a little bit about your history, what led you to InMobi and what you do in Bangalore.
Yeah, so I joined InMobi about nearly 4 years back. And before that, I was working with large corporations like Citi and Citigroup and Deutsche Bank in various divisions on consumer banking and wealth management and payments. And then, of course, before that, I was a startup entrepreneur myself for about 3-4 years in the dot-com days. So burned my fingers, learned a lot, but realized that is the best thing, most exciting part of being an entrepreneur. So did that for a while and then realized that there's much more happening in the world out there, and I got to work with a company that is passionate and ambitious and looking to build something successful out of India, which is very global and something which has never been done before by any Indian company whatsoever on the product spectrum. So joined them, and then currently I head the global performance advertising business for InMobi and also drive the product roadmap for the developer platform. And that's what I do by working very closely with our customers, both advertisers and publishers, and of course, driving the business direction and product strategy with the various teams in InMobi, just to make sure that we are innovating ahead of the curve and giving the maximum ROI for advertisers and the best possible eCPMs and monetization for our publishers.
And InMobi is one of these stories. It's very impressive. I was obviously been around long enough to see the meteoric growth and rise. I mean, and announced with them, a $200 million funding about a year ago or just over a year ago, and watched them absorb some great companies, and it's been fascinating to watch this grow. So, how big is the team in Bangalore now that you're working with?
Well, the team in Bangalore is about around 500 people.
It's crazy.
And yeah, it's crazy. It's growing at a scorching pace, and I think we would we just moved into a new nice office, and it just already sort of completely strapped out.
But that just shows you the opportunities here, right? Is that you talk about being an entrepreneur, and I mean, being an entrepreneur can sometimes be isolating, can't it? Like you long for the days that you work with a team, and you have retreats, and you do the things that teams do, and you work with somebody who's smarter than you, so you can learn from them. I mean, you must have been going through that as you were building your own. Maybe you're the smart guy, but I'm certainly not. I long for those days.
No, absolutely. It's very humbling because with every new hire, we've learned that there's so much more stuff out there that we don't know. And the best part is none of the founders or a part of the senior exec team are necessarily from the advertising field or mobile technology or telecom backgrounds. I think we just simply understood and realized that there's a huge opportunity out there. If you can simply think first principles, create a strong technology and platform-based organization, and of course, in our own opportunistic way, make sure we are conquering the global scale because mobile is global. I think those three, four pieces came in together, and I guess backed with strong investors, it started making sense.
Well, it's I love watching InMobi's. So every time I get an opportunity to sit and talk to somebody from the organization and in a senior level like you, because I always learn from you guys, whether it's in Bangalore or in the United States or anywhere else. It's always been a great pleasure, and I hope to do the same thing, extract a little bit of knowledge about the stuff that you guys are doing and the things that you are seeing. Because you have such a worldwide focus, you're able to bring this kind of data up to the forefront based on what it is that you do to make money, which is your business. And so you guys recently at the beginning of May of 2013, if you're watching this a little bit later, actually released some staggering numbers. I mean, we know that China is a huge opportunity. We know that India is labeled a huge opportunity. And I've just spent a weekend talking about Africa as a huge opportunity as well as maybe, I don't think it's saturation yet, but the U.S. starts to slow down and not in general, but app fatigue sets in and mobile penetration is at an all-time high. So you start to look at other opportunities, and obviously China is one of those, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the big question, of course, is if you are a mobile first app developer, if you have a mobile first business, then you might as well go after users and smartphone users and tablet users across the world. And if you have a product that is fairly generic, I mean, yeah, you're not doing a trading business, and hence you don't need licenses across all these countries. But if you're doing a mobile first app, which is a game or a communication app or any generic thing, then why not distribute and acquire users worldwide, and why not monetize the hell out of the whole thing? I think the whole Apple ecosystem and Google Play have made things very simple and easy and frictionless for you to run and expand your business across borders. And of course, players like us allow and help and enable customers to do that much more easily. So, which is why, I mean, whether it's China, I mean, this whole economy and ecosystem is about unknowns from Lithuania and Estonia and Russia and of course Finland and a lot of these our own US and India and in these countries who've done phenomenally good jobs in making sure that they build something great, but their ability to sort of have a multiplier effect on distribution and making money is not limited by their own size. They're like 5 to 10 people each. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting and sort of insane in terms of this scale, which unknown developers, like we all know, have managed to get. And that's why we believe that a lot of that scale is going to come from China, both in terms of consumers and users, and now a staggering number of developers who are originating from China, looking to conquer not just the Chinese market, but the global market. And we can talk about that in some other time, but we see that dimension happening on both sides.
You know, it's one of these things that you start to realize that, perhaps when I was growing up and you wanted to get into China, and I looked at doing an importing business for a silly idea, in the 90s, and the thought of importing from China or the thought of exporting to China just kind of made me a little bit sick, just because the amount of effort that it would take to actually penetrate into that market in anything other than software, it would seem. And then the trust factor, right, which is, especially as these companies or these countries emerge. I mean, I did a lot of traveling in the 90s and I could go into Bangkok and I could get any cassette any album or CD that I wanted or any movie that I wanted right on the street corner. And there's a lot of I don't know, glorification, I suppose, amplification of the piracy that goes on there. So, all of these things are going kind of in traditional media. They're coming at you. And as a business person, you kind of make a decision at that point, saying, maybe like I'm not going to go into China. But then all of a sudden, the app economy emerged. And now everything's changed because you can, at the flick of a button, enable your application in China. So is that what it is? Like, why is it so important for these companies to be in China? Is it the population? Is it the education? Is it the consumption? What is it that makes it so important for mobile-first companies? As you said, game companies, communication applications. Why is it so important for them to be there?
So I think the fundamental is very clear. As a developer, as a gaming or any of these app company, you're looking at essentially two things. You're looking at acquiring large number of users who will engage with your application in a much more loyal and frequent way, an active way. And of course, a certain proportion of those users will end up helping you monetize and make a lot of money and have high LTV. So with that objective in mind, China has got all the three. So huge number of smartphone devices and tablets now increasing, as you mentioned earlier. Much higher average levels of usage and consumption of their mobile device. And that's understandable in terms of the way the smartphone has become a much more closer device, a personal device for the Chinese versus an average American, because of the demography, of the teenage nature of China, of the fact that this is something that they've catapulted themselves from the pre-pager era and directly to the smartphone era, whereas in US it actually went step by step. So all those things have happened, which makes the mobile device a much more intrinsic part of the Chinese consumer, an average consumer, vis-a-vis an average American. That's the way we look at things. So there is huge penetration and device ownership. There is huge, just sheer engagement and consumption of the device. And then by the sheer demographic of the whole piece, they are all willing to experiment and do a lot more with their phone in terms of figuring out apps and testing them apps and all that. And then finally, given that the market has traditionally been a very strong online RPG and all those MMORPG market, the moment they see some similar such experiences on mobile and it makes it simpler for them, I think there's an inclination, there's an intrinsic inclination to sort of start using those apps and play games and stuff like that. So I think all those add up. And then the moment the whole freemium model came, where they didn't have to pay for anything, and that's where the whole paid versus freemium came in, it suddenly became such a large thing because all they needed was downloading apps for free, and then they could decide whether they want to pay or not. So I think all these 3-4 things have added up a lot more, and that's why one has to be very clear that you cannot just ignore China anymore if you're looking at a global app business where you have a generic app which can get consumers. So that's the way we look at it. And increasingly for a lot of global developers who work with us for China or for China, Japan, Korea, they realize that if they're not in those markets, they're pretty much losing out 40 to 50% of the opportunity.
The global opportunity.
The global opportunity. Hence, you cannot just do with being in US and Europe and FIGS and Nordics anymore. You got to figure out China and Japan and Korea, especially China.
Well, and it's pretty obvious to see that when Facebook is talking about this, and Google is risking being ostracized for being in China, and I mean, this is very important to them because the growth for those companies, for those big companies, is China, isn't it? Right now, this is the battlefield that they're going after very aggressively, and there's already incumbents in China that are huge, that are comparable in size to Facebook, right? So, and to Twitter. So this is a market that obviously needs to be penetrated. I'm not saying that that's the sole reason that you go in there, but you talk about key factors in there. Is that I got to hone in on a couple of these. Is that they adopt the technology much better. Freemium is a very important piece, as you've said, and I've talked to a number of companies that have gone in with that freemium model and made a lot of money as a result of this. And in the early days, if you wanted to get into an emerging economy or a growth economy like China or India, for that matter, I think of Lever, and they had to offer products that were comparable to North American products, but at a reduced price in order to be able to penetrate that market because of the disparity of income. But with a freemium model and small microtransactions in local currency and a huge volume of people that use the product, all of a sudden you're in the market and you've adopted the currency and are able to sell. Is that how important is that? That must have been the catalyst for driving some of the growth of some of the early companies there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there are two parts to that whole freemium thing and why it's become such a catalyst for Chinese users to sort of spend more. So one, as I earlier said, the whole propensity is to sort of experiment and this inclination for emoticons and virtual goods and all that stuff from a culture standpoint. And that's true for both China and Korea and Japan at some level. That is one, from a propensity to do much more in-app purchase behavior vis-a-vis an average US guy, because they've just grown to play and share emoticons and share swords and do stuff like that. So that's one angle. The second angle, which is quite paradoxical, is the absence of Google Play, where people used to think that because there's no Google Play and there's no standard method of paying in China, it is a crazy market. How will I make money? Because users have no way to pay me in China. It's actually quite the reverse. I think what has happened in China is, because the top 5 distribution platforms are the big app stores, whether it is 360 or 91.com or Tencent's own distribution platform, they have very interestingly aggregated a range of payment methods, ranging from Alibaba or Tencent's own virtual currency and all that stuff, which is already a very prevalent method of payment in the country. Many more users have been using that in general for online payments in that country. And it was very easy for them to gravitate for that on mobile also. So while there was an absence of Google Play and a standard payment method, I think because there's a much more variety of payment methods available, which have been more prevalent, and there's not much notion of credit cards as such, I think that has actually led to making the whole payment of in-app purchase much more seamless and easy. And that is why there is a higher notion of freemium and stuff like that. So I think that's how we look at it. And where the challenge of the fragmented Android App Store thing is actually quite a boon from a user standpoint, because all these 4-5 guys have done a great job of ensuring that the payment process and the payment flexibility is very high.
Would you say...
You also mentioned...
Finish off, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, you also referred to the whole problem of piracy and the fact that the trust is not there. I think these 4-5 big distribution platforms have done a great job to show that they can be there trustworthy. They curate the stuff. They have anti-fraud and anti-piracy sort of tools to ensure that the apps listed on those stores are clean and not from fraudulent sources. So I think all these problems have been sorted in their own way, and hence global developers now know that there are ways and avenues to do clean business and of course make a lot of money. And that's why you see a lot more action happening there increasingly.
And yeah, I mean, according to your own statistics, you're talking about the propensity to buy in-app purchase behavior. That they say 46% of smartphone users in China have made an in-app purchase versus 37% of smartphone users in the United States. And then you extrapolate the large number of smartphone users and going forward, large number of smartphone users. You can't ignore this at all. And it's this is one of the things that is quite obvious. The question I was going to ask you just before, when I was interrupting you, was: Do you think that is China more advanced in mobile payments than North America because of the competition that you have in for these mobile aggregators for the stores? Because we have 2 basically, right? Maybe 3 if you count 3 or 4 if you count Microsoft and RIM or BlackBerry. But you've got the App Store and you've got Google Play. But so we're tied into those as platforms. But do you think that you're a little bit more sophisticated in the payment process than North America in China?
Yeah, so I think it is definitely much more cleaner in North America
Because it's
because of a
yeah,
linked card and file.
yeah,
Absolutely. But from a sheer volume and population standpoint in China, and the fact that they are so accustomed to paying through Alipay and Tencent QQ Pay and all other methods, I think the lack of having a consistent method has been solved in a much better way. So I won't say it's sophisticated. I won't say it's much more sophisticated. I think the original envisaged problem of payment methods not being consistent there has been solved very well by the fact that there are a range of methods plus very strong in-app carrier billing,
right. Very
which has been
important.
integrated, right? So that is, I mean, given that they're just two big carriers, and if any of these stores have a direct partnership with these carriers, you essentially cover 95% of the population. Whereas that's something which is not still not working out beautifully in the US. I know that Google Play is connected with a couple of those carriers for in-app carrier billing, but there have been reports that I would say there's a lesser proportion of people who are paying through that method vis-a-vis credit card on file.
Right. Well, and certainly, the App Store is 100% credit card, and even RIM's, so BlackBerry's platform is moving into carrier billing as well, and I think that it's very important. I mean, they launched with PayPal, and you talk about limiting on one payment platform, and you wonder why they're suffering at this point. But when you look at this, is that you see some of these great companies that are going in there and excelling. Are there some key strategies that they're using here? Are there I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about key strategies for getting into market. And I've heard things like localization, and maybe the Chinese population isn't as interested in a game about cowboys as they would be about something else, right? So localization. So are there key strategies that they're implementing? And the second question that I'll ask after that, I just want maybe you to think about, is marketing tactics. Like, I mean, if you're a North American company or a European company, how do you go about popularizing your application in a local market like China, where it's so big and the opportunities are so vast, but the challenges are there? So first, strategies. Are there any key strategies that you've seen implemented that have worked very well for companies to move into China?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are 2 to 3 things that people have been really applying as a consistent strategy. I think number one, definitely you got to make sure that your app is localized in every level. We've seen that if you have a localized app versus a non-localized one, the percentage of increase of downloads goes up by 130%. So that's something which you've seen consistently, where you have localized your app not just in the Chinese language, but also regionalized at some level to make sure that the characters are cute, so that your game characters are resembling more Chinese characters and stuff like that. So I think localization and regionalization at every level, not just in terms of your game mechanics, but also your characters and the way you display your ads and stuff like that, has really helped these companies to do a much better job. So that's one. I think the second important angle, of course, is really focusing on figuring out a two-pronged strategy in terms of distribution. I think you cannot ignore those 5 to 10 big Android app stores there in the absence of Google Play. So what is the best way for one to work with these 5 to 10 stores? And of course, make sure that your app is being featured in the right place in the store. And of course, the stores are doing whatever it takes to promote your app. So I think that particular angle of fragmented app stores is being looked at very seriously. And any such product that allows them to publish their app in a much more seamless way to these 10 to 20 big stores in China is an important angle. Of course, the third piece is what you earlier talked about. I think there's a clear strategy of ensuring that we use a combination of mobile advertising through networks like us and display advertising as such. Definitely. There a lot of them people are also making sure that they strike partnership with these stores. The third thing that a lot of them are doing is the fact that there is a lot of mobile app discovery happening in any case through mobile web there. So ensuring that they are actually promoting this stuff on mainstream TV is helping a lot of these people to drive up downloads for their apps. So it's always a combination of these few things, and we've seen that they're applying all of them uh, there. The other big dimension that is there is social. I think given that there are large social networks there already, like Tencent and Renren and these players, uh, there's a huge angle of social recommendations and advertisements that can help drive downloads. So all these companies are trying different stuff, but you've seen that simply using a combination of mobile ad networks like us, who understand the market and how the users respond, and working with these 5 to 10 important stores is the most common strategy that is being effective.
What works there? What size of a company? What kind of budget do you need? Is it a small company that can do this? Is it, an app, a group of guys in their basement that are building an app that they think they can market in there, or is it a company that has a little bit of money, a little bit of funding that can actually afford? They have to be able to afford to distribute this and put some money behind it. Is there an ideal size of company that is producing an app that should go into China?
Well, I wouldn't think so. I think it is not. It's definitely there's nothing to do with size of the company. I think it's about the nature of your product and the game and the app, and in what sense does it appeal to the Chinese consumers. Uh, yeah, I mean, of course, your size will determine your budget a bit, but uh, any of these guys, or if they actually end up having an app that rises up the charts of these 4 5 stores, they might get overnight
Yeah.
success. So I think both large and torso and tail guys are accessing China and targeting China, and because it's the app ecosystem, it's not difficult, or there are no big barriers for all of them to try China and possibly succeed if they have a great app and a great marketing strategy.
Well, what about I mean, how do they know? And this maybe this is the $1 million question or the $1 billion question. How do they know what appeals to the Chinese market? Is there, I mean, obviously they could work with you. I've heard of great ideas, and maybe this is a tactic where they test it in some advertisements that are displayed in China, and you do some A/B testing. But how do they know what would appeal? Like, they have this game. And is it an assumption? Like, a company that I ran, we had this game. It was like a Tetris knockoff. It was called Kaglom, and all of a sudden it was the #1 game in South Korea. Right? We didn't do anything, but it just kind of spread like wildfire in South Korea. And but it stopped. It was isolated there. So we didn't know that it would be popular in South Korea. But so how are entrepreneurs or businesses supposed to figure that out?
Yeah, so I think I mean, there is, of course, a lot of available insights and research about how mobile consumption is happening in China across devices, platforms, genre and category of apps, uh, time of day, uh, and how they're actually influencing the app download decision. So a lot of those research and insights are available uh, from primary sources to a range of partners. Of course, it could be players like us. It could be stuff like what Destimo or Flurry and players like these constantly churn out. And that's one, I guess, a starting filter for to just understand what the market is all about. But that's just a starting point. You got to figure out and test, and the best part of working with any of these networks or players like these stores is that it doesn't take too long to test and see how users are responding to your application in China. So that is where the combination of using simple products like what InMobi has. InMobi has this whole product called InMobi App Publish, which simply allows a developer, an Android developer, to submit their app to InMobi and publish directly to those 150 to 200 stores across the world, which also include a few Chinese stores. And that is seamless because it's free. And then you can see how those stores and users are responding, what sort of downloads and installs you're getting. And then you can always check whether the LTV of the users you're getting is high quality or not. So there are many of these interesting ways to ascertain and validate and check feasibility of what your app is going to be all about in China. And then once you have tested and seen some success, then one can easily scale and do a lot more with the various distribution tactics we talked about. So I think that's how we look at it. It is a complex market. I mean, for a lot of US developers, anything international is difficult, and of course, China is very complex in terms of perception. And I guess that's where one has to beat the myth that in that mobile ecosystem, one cannot ignore these markets, and there are many companies globally placed to help them do a much better job of understanding the market and eventually help them distribute. And that's what developers have to take advantage of.
Well, absolutely. And you mentioned, these five bigger marketplaces, that Android marketplaces, that they also have to be in touch with, and they have to be, sell through or be listed in. I mean, how do they, if they're not on the ground there and they don't know the market very well, how do they find these guys? How do they get in touch with these guys? How do they get their product featured in these app stores?
Well, so there are two ways here. One, of course, there are three ways here. One is working directly, and if you're large, and if you can manage to land up there and attend big events like the GMIC, which happened like a month back when all of us were there, you can easily strike and discuss and work with the respective these 5-6 stores. And of course, you can strike commercial agreements. And there's a whole jingbang around, having a legal office in China, because the payments, you have to pull out payments. How do you get paid? And all that is difficult. So that's one option for the large guys who can afford to do so. The second option is, and again, there are companies in China who understand that this is a viable market opportunity. And we know about companies like Coco China and iDream Sky, who are at one level working closely with these 5 to 6 big app stores in China. And then they help Western developers to have a much more concerted strategy for China. So they are primarily more advisors, and they help in this bridging at some level. And that's another viable option for certain folks. And then, of course, the third option is working with players like us who not only have the research and insights and the relationship, but also a strong technology platform backed by understanding of user data to make sure that what you get in terms of your budgets and campaigns is high ROI, because we understand really what users are taking for your kind of application. So I think those are the three options that one can look at very objectively. And again, it depends on what size you have and what gumption you have and how you look at China per se.
That's true. It is gumption is what it takes, because you mentioned it. Well, you mentioned a few of the things that there's always apprehension when you move into a new market. Is that because we all know that you don't just turn it on and it's overnight success, right? The likelihood of an app, reaching the altitude of something like Angry Birds on a global scale is, you might as well just put all your money into a lottery ticket, right? Because you have better odds of winning that right now. So, but you mentioned some of the pitfalls, right? And that's always what makes, as an entrepreneur, you stay within what you know, and oftentimes that means, like, I don't know how to collect fees or payment from China, which is a big challenge, right? Is that because not only how do you collect it, how do you then pay taxes on it, and how do you extract it into my bank account here in North America or in Europe? Are there some glaring pitfalls that you would say, listen, folks, take a look at these before you go into China. Take a look at this, because if you don't have this all lined up, the challenges are going to be many, and you are going to be frustrated, and you might lose your shirt. Is there anything that you can think of?
Well, I think, there are two scenarios, right? One is where there's a huge phenomena where the Western developers are entering China through these app stores, where the app store does not charge you a price to distribute your app. The app stores are actually having a rev share agreement, a revenue share agreement with you. So for every app that is downloaded, and of course for all the in-app purchases that those users make, there is a rev share that the app store takes off, and then of course shares the remaining with the developer. It's a classic Apple and Google model, except that it is not 70-30, it's 50-50.
What?
It's 50% to the store.
Wow.
And then, unless you have a strong mechanism for collecting that money from these 5, 6, 7, 10 stores, and the number of stores are always increasing, because there are like 100 Android app stores in China, and 10, 20 of them are strong enough. It is just a big mess, this whole collecting your payments, if you are doing a revenue share agreement, right? The other scenario is where you are a Rovio or an Outfit 7 and any of these large guys, a Fruit Ninja who has huge traffic from China, who has already got a large user base who's browsing a game or using a game, and you want to monetize that guy, and then you essentially want to make sure that you serve ads to them and of course make money. That is relatively cleaner and simpler because then you can always work with a global ad
Right.
network
Right.
to monetize your ads, and that payments and all that happens at a global level. So I think the first one is slightly more tricky, and that's an increasingly important phenomena where most of these app stores are only working on a revenue share arrangement, and then that's tricky. And that's where one has to be slightly more worried about.
It's one thing I didn't realize that these stores offered a 50-50 split, it just takes me back to those early days when in the J2ME days when you could there were other app stores. There were probably a dozen other app stores in North America where there were dominant app stores that you could download games for BlackBerry or for just feature phones, and. During those days, it was this kind of free-for-all that it seems like it is in China right now, where there was a lot of control held by those guys, and they were outrageous. They were charging way too much as a conduit to the customer, but they had the power. The App Store came in and all but eradicated those companies. There are very few left, if any. And as we said, in North America, it's dominated by Google Play and the App Store. Is there the chance that that's going to happen in China, or is it just too big?
Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, right now it's a crazy number of stores. The last count is like 200 Android app stores there, which are emerging and catering to all sorts of niche audiences in China, ranging from like kid stores and mom stores, and of course the big ones. But there is another phenomena that is happening. I mean, why don't you realize that given that the Google Play Store could not have been there, there is the entry of the Amazon store, which is gone there to make sure that they resolve some of the deficiencies in the other store, like the pricing, like the revenue share, like the whole angle of having a curated set of apps which are not pirated for sure. And that's interesting because Amazon has seen a golden opportunity there to go in there because Google Play cannot exist there and be the most dominating maybe Android store in China in the next few years. So I think I like that because it's it's uh, it's something that is solving for the problems that existed with working with those five big guys, and by definition, it's Amazon is high quality and curated, and they do a great job of recommendations. So that is the sort of stuff that will keep happening, and that is good for the ecosystem.
Amazon is, I mean, certainly for anybody who's ever listened to any podcast that I'm a part of, is that I believe that Amazon will be the most valuable company on the planet at some point because of these moves that they do, and certainly the ability to get into China very quickly in a fragmented market like Android and be the branded, curated voice for Android down there is amazing to me, and I think that there's huge opportunity for those guys. So. Yeah, and they obviously think that, and everybody thinks that, and that's not a smart statement, but that's just a matter of fact statement that Android is doing wonderful things, or that Amazon is doing wonderful things. My question, and my last question is this: like, what is succeeding there? We talked about games, we talked about communications applications that are in there, but there's broad categories for games. I mean, is there anything that you've seen that would tell you that you're on the leading edge of a trend here, that if you get into China with these kind of apps, that the population is thirsty for something like this? Is there anything that you're seeing out there that we can leave some the listeners with that might inspire them to get into China?
Absolutely, I think within game itself, what you've seen that what is getting more prevalent and popular is the very, very, very casual games, which is snackable content because of two reasons. One, wireless connectivity. I mean, 3G connectivity is both rough and expensive. So for the average Chinese teenager who has managed to get an Android smartphone, may not want to spend so much on uh, playing that game over 3G or playing long time and all that stuff for mid-core games. So casual games, snackable content, working at a much popular level because of the demographic of the population and other sort of infrastructural angles like connectivity and broadband and stuff like that, right? So that's there. The second thing is, uh, I think Japan and Korea traditionally have been a much more uh, hardcore, mid-core, online gaming market-led economies. I mean, players out there have done a much more stuff on uh, real player games and multi-morph games and all that. And China traditionally has not done that. So, which is why I think we've seen that it's more the casual types, of course, the puzzle games and the card games and stuff like that. That is much more vogue and much more successful.
And what about the communication side? I mean, there's behemoths in there, right? That are trying to get in there, but there's got to be some little niche that you think that is completely not exploited yet when it comes to is the Chinese market? Are they Instagram fanatics? Are they filter fanatics? Are they real-time communication fanatics? Are they are they gamblers? Are they is there something that there's just you look up and there's a gap that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think on the pure messaging and chat perspective, most players think that Tencent has done a phenomenal job, and both both Kakao and NH Line, who otherwise in other markets have really sort of become dominant and the number one and number two players in many of these other markets, they just sort of realize that China, it's Tencent who's really cracked the market because of multiple reasons. So I think that core piece itself is sort of protected by Tencent, while there are many other players who are coming up strongly and using a combination of chat and messaging and search, and players like Qihu. I mean, there's a player called Qihu, which has done a phenomenal job. Of course, Baidu doing much more on the app side by a combination of search and all that. So I think those are local players who've done well, but many of these other global chat and communication players realize that it is not an easy challenge, right, on the communication side. Having said that, I think the Chinese guys have, of course, respectfully copied and replicated every successful or not successful mobile app company in the Silicon Valley. And there are when you meet these guys, they don't talk about their own name. They share, I am the Pinterest of China, I am the Instagram of China, I am the color of China. And I think all of that is happening. But the few of those which are again working out very well is the photo sharing guys, because again, video cannot work too well because of infrastructure reasons and bandwidth reasons. So we've seen all that happening. And it's funny because when you think that let's say, let's take the whole e-hail taxi application companies like Uber and Hilo in the western part of the world, and you would think that's a very Western phenomena. Suddenly you see a whole rise of e-hail apps in China, in Beijing and Shanghai and all that, who are getting very popular. So I think the whole ecosystem is global, and it takes no time for these interesting business models to get replicated by smart entrepreneurs across the globe. And because it's all mobile, it's because there are distribution platforms and of course, networks like us who can help do much more distribution easily. There are no borders. It's a global porous thing. So that's my final statement.
It's so, what you just said there is so. What's so great about the mobile industry, right? This is a global thing that has descended upon us all at the same time. And countries are participating in different levels, but the acceleration that participation is faster than anything we've ever seen before. And as a business with an innovative idea, like an Uber, like a Halo, like ride-sharing car companies, right, that leverage that, or even hitchhiking companies that you tell your location is, and then there's a car around the corner that is participating, and they'll give you a ride for a tip. Those kind of things. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that say, listen, we're gonna contain it, we're gonna grow slowly here, and then we're gonna expand into other states. But at the same time, as they grow slowly here, like Uber, going from city to city to city, you look over at China and they're like, hey, that's a good idea. Boom! And then they are the dominant player in China, and then Uber can't get into China because it was their idea at the beginning, but somebody else actioned very quickly. So that's a cautionary tale about this industry, isn't it? There's no time to wait. You have to put the pedal down, much like InMobi has done, and just say you are either a global player or you will be relegated to this little spot over here and outside of the countries that are dominant like China. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I think this is one economy, or this is one phenomena from a whole industry shift standpoint that is far more global in its perspective and its learning curve and acceleration curve than anything else. I mean, PC and servers and online has gone and done all that. And PC was only about four economies: US, UK, Germany, and Japan. But then mobile is really where you've got Lithuania who's on the map for some reason. There's Estonia on the map for some reason. And I'm sure there are random countries in Russia which are doing great. So it is truly global, and it can be overnight success at the same time. But at the same time, it can actually, if you're not innovating constantly for your users, there's so much more competition out there. You could just be relegated to a nobody in no time. And you've seen that with many, many apps who've actually been great success stories, but in a matter of like months, their user base has shrunk like by 50, 60%. So it is a difficult and crazy and unforgivable ecosystem.
I would say this is the last question here, and then I'm absolutely going to let you get home, Piyush. I really appreciate you spending this time with me so late in the evening for you. When we look at what's happened in North America, and it's kind of, we're in this kind of post-app world. Like the app economy has come, and everybody talks about app fatigue, and the number of downloads has declined a little bit, and we use the same 3 or 4 or 5 apps every day, and we've matured into this spot where it's about user interface and user design and integration into life, and always on services, and there's a new layer as a result of what's happened with the app economy, and then I look at China as this burgeoning market where there's a flourish of activity around smartphones, and everybody's activating smartphones, and there's tons of downloads, and people are trying all these new apps, much like it was maybe 2.5 years ago when the app economy emerged in the US. What do you think happens here for China? How long does it take for them to get into that stasis period where it's no longer about the app economy, it's about enabling the economy through apps? How are we going to see that transition much faster than we did in the US?
Well, I think there is that gestation period that China will go through where there will be a large early majority of smartphone owners, first-time smartphone owners and first-time tablet owners, who will participate in this whole gaming frenzy, right? And then they'll keep doing so for the next 1 to 2 years for sure. Then what is going to happen, I mean, the whole US phenomena is where the late majority smartphone users who've lived with there and done their Angry Birds and done all that stuff for like 2, 3, 4 months now realize that I need my photo app, I need my one news app, I need my one music app, and I'm done, right? I think that late majority is going to take quite a while because you've got 500 million more people to buy those smartphones. And you've got, of the 500 million people who bought the smartphones in China, there are at least 400 million who bought $50 to $100 worth smartphones. And they'll never be satisfied. They'll always want to sort of do something to make sure that they upgrade to the next phone and do much more beyond that. So I would say that whole functional utility, non-gaming set of applications that make the whole thing more consolidated it has a fast rise, has a fast ramp up in China. But I would still say that at least 2 to 3 years before you see people getting fed up of apps in China. I think it's a crazy economy, and by definition, from a culture standpoint, the proclivity of leisure and entertainment and attachment to the device is much, much higher.
Well, my wife would argue that my attachment to my devices it rivals that of probably the new owner of a smartphone in China. But boy, oh boy, oh boy. I mean, this is so fascinating because to get a glimpse into China like this and the opportunities there, if you're listening to this and you haven't considered China as an opportunity, I look at it as greenfield. And the way you've just described it is that, the games were the opening for this. And if China is just at that point right now, where and it's a much larger market that is waiting for the opportunity to play your game, and then waiting for the opportunity to use your utility app, like an Instagram, for example, this is going to be a far greater opportunity than it ever was in the United States. So why aren't you considering this? Why aren't you looking at this? Why aren't you, getting in touch with Piyush to actually help you move into these markets and exploit them to your benefit? And I don't mean exploit like underage labor. What I'm talking about is leveraging this growing tide and becoming big in China. And then when you made your money, come back to the US and put some money in there, because it takes much more money to make money in the US than it does in China. That's my short interpretation summary of what we've talked about. I can't thank you enough for doing this. I had wanted to talk to you about India. I had wanted to talk to you about Africa. I think that those are separate episodes, and I would hope that I could get you back on here to talk about what's going on in India, because you're right there in Bangalore and with a huge team. And if you are willing, I would love to reschedule something where we could talk about India independently as well as what we've just done with China. Can we do that?
Definitely.
Maybe a little earlier in the evening for you. I don't mind getting up a little earlier to make sure that you get home for dinner.
That would be good, yeah.
Piyush, where should I send people? Is it just InMobi.com? Is that where you want me to send people?
Yeah, InMobi.com is fine.
Look, I know that I've found this so fascinating, and we will start looking at other countries as well. Go to InMobi.com. We have been speaking with Piyush Shah, who's the VP and GM Performance Advertising and Developer Platform in Bangalore for InMobi. It's pushing 11 o'clock p.m. there. Piyush, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure of mine.
For those of you who are listening, watching, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, I appreciate the fact that you bring this into your day. However many times you do listen to these things, the fact that you've made it this far means so much to me. What I would ask for you, just one simple thing. It is my currency. It is how I prove that this is actually resonating with you. Whatever application you've used to download this from, whether you're on iOS or Android or Windows or on a BlackBerry phone, go to that podcast store that you got this at and rate this. Give me a 4 or 5 star rating, whatever you feel appropriate, and then leave a little note for me there, and I will mention you on air. It is my currency. I would appreciate it if you could do that. I call to the masses. Please, it helps me, allows me to bring these kind of quality guests every episode. So please go and do that wherever you might be. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the time, and we'll see you next time on Untether.tv. Thanks, Piyush. Go to sleep.
Hey. Thanks, Bob.